there is a problem and it's traced back to the formula, don't believe that you must have introduced the contamination into the product, because the contamination has been shown in the past to be in the product before you actually got it. And contamination by itself of these things is not going to be an issue. That's why you treat them carefully. If in fact you keep the thing cool, once opened you keep it in a cool place, you look at what it says about temperature ranges, and if necessary keep it in the fridge in hot humid climates, then you'll inhibit the growth of the bacteria. And if you prepare it carefully, because the main amounts of bacterial growth, mold growth can happen in much more wider range of temperatures, but the main inhibitor of bacterial growth is the fact that it is dry. And once you add water, of course, that's when anything that's there has the potential of growing considerably. So the preparation issues will come to, but for now, what you must do is take seriously the need to treat this as an unsterile product that has the potential to contain molds and bacteria that could harm your baby, and so treat it as best you possibly can. Now, there are online some how to prepare formula for bottle feeding at home, which comes from the World Health Organization's food safety document centres. So if you simply Google how to prepare formula for bottle feeding at home, you'll get that list of resources. There's also one that emphasises not only what you feed but how you feed, which is a UNICEF UNICEF UK, which is called Infant Formula and Responsive Bottle Feeding, a guide for parents. Both of those are good overviews that you can download and then adapt to your own circumstances. But they emphasise hygiene, washing your hands before you start, cleaning the workspace where you work, all of those things, making up one bottle at a time, and not letting bottles stand, because the longer they stand, the more the multiplication of whatever was in them will have been happening. Those are the sorts of things that can reduce the risk of the level of contamination, which you have to accept is going to be there, becoming one that has the power to affect the baby. Just simply being exposed to an odd stray bacterium is not going to necessarily cause harm if the baby can overcome that, or if there's so little of the contaminant there that it can't thrive in the baby's gut. So basically treat it as non-sterile, keep it cool, use all sorts of hygiene measures, read those 2 guides and adapt them to your own needs at home, and take great care, because this is not sterile. The exception is the ready-to-feed formulas that are little liquid packages. They are N-sterilised, so they have in fact been sterilised, and you can count on them not getting contaminated until you open them, whereas before with the powders they are contaminated before you open them. And if you use those, you certainly will be dealing with a sterile single-use product that can be used and gone. But A, they're expensive, and B, the problem is that they're possibly not as good nutritionally as or allergenically, there's 2 different ways of looking at it, as the powdered formulas, because the extra heat treatment that's needed for the ready-to-feeds, the liquid ready-to-feeds, adds another layer of heat processing to the ingredients. And they've been shown to have higher levels of some of the byproducts of heat in formula, which is of concern, because if you know what antioxidants are, you know that they're working to actually try and stop oxidative products affecting you. There are higher levels of oxidative products in the ready-to-feeds than there are in the powder. So it's a bit between the devil and the deep blue sea. Fundamentally, I would go with the powdered formula because it's less expensive. It could be a lot less expensive than it actually is, but that's another issue. I'd go with the powdered formula, first infant formula, reputable manufacturer, low protein content, and that's about as much as anyone can say with safety. However, there is a really good UK website called First Steps Nutrition Trust, which has a lot of detail about infant formula and the types of formula, the ingredients, and so forth and so on, which is accessible online. So anyone who's interested in the formula issue, that's the only independent source of infant formula. Do not take seriously the advertising claims of the companies, and do not rely on the mothers' clubs and the information that comes to you from the manufacturers, because anyone analysing those will point out any number of false claims and suggestions and inferences that really are not helpful to you. If you're formula feeding, you need to take it seriously and treat it as carefully as you would any other product that has the potential to harm your baby, because it does have that potential. And we can't sugar the pill and say that it's perfectly safe, even if companies would like you to believe that.
And once the formula's been purchased and opened, and what kind of water is safe for creating the formula in a bottle?
Water that's been well boiled, but not for too long, because that concentrates the minerals in it. Low mineral water levels. So basically, ideally, every water authority in the country would be able to tell you whether or not their tap water is suitable for bottle feeding. We assume that it will be, but in actual fact, the quality of water around Australia varies greatly. And while tap water should be what you're able to use, and you should never use mineral water, because that by definition has more minerals in it than regular tap water might, there's no need to go to the, the totally filtered water. It doesn't hurt to have a home filter that you filter the water through, as long as you maintain that filter before you boil it. But it has to be boiled. That's the thing that knocks the contaminants down, if there are any. And that should then be, in the guides that I've mentioned about bottle feeding at home, it will tell you about how long it can stand before it becomes too warm and allows the growth of pathogens. The problem is, the World Health Organization recognises the risk of bacterial contamination and urges people to use water not below 70 degrees centigrade. And so do most of the independent sources that are looking at this. But with many infant formulas that have added things that are heat sensitive to them, like the bacteria that they've added, it sounds better as probiotics, but you need to understand that probiotics are in fact bacteria. Many of those will be killed by using water at 70 degrees. And there's an additional issue in that if you don't use water at the temperature that the manufacturers say to, then you're actually taking on the responsibility for the results of that. Whereas if you use water at the temperature exactly that the manufacturers say, they're responsible for any negative outcomes. And it really just depends on which way you want to go, whether you want to be certain you've killed the bacteria, whether you want to have no liability in the event that in fact your child is affected by the formula badly. So I've discussed this in Milk Matters, but it's a difficult one to resolve. Generally speaking, I would suggest going for using the WHO and the UNICEF recommendations about this, because there is no exemption from water quality issues in a country like Australia. Many places in the country are using bore water. People are using tank water, which is assumed to be safe. But if you've ever tried to maintain a tank, you will know that it has many things in it sometimes besides plain H2O. And so we need to at least be sure that we have killed whatever might be living in it. And then not giving it an opportunity for things to grow in it means making up one bottle at a time, not storing formula bottles in the interim, because that's the situation where bacteria that might be present can start to grow.
What equipment is preferable for bottle feeding?
Not sure quite what you mean by equipment. You mean bottles and teats and things like that? I guess I would prefer to use glass bottles always for a range of reasons. There is migration from the plastic into formula if you're using plastic bottles, and it's preferable to use glass from that point of view. Also, from the point of view of if you're using glass, it is more readily cleaned, properly cleaned and sterilised than plastic is. If you've ever tried to wash a plastic bottle in hot soapy water, and then afterwards, if you've had the cream bottle, for instance, and you've rinsed that and you've wanted to use it for something else, and you run your finger around, you've used detergent and hot soapy water, if you run your finger, you'll still find a fine film of grease on the inside of that fat formerly cream container. And I think it's very hard to get plastic bottles really as clean as possible. Biofilms can form, which protect the bacteria that hide underneath them from actually being dislodged and destroyed. So I would prefer to see glass being used. Another reason why I prefer glass being used is, apart from the cleanliness aspect of things, is the fact that you're less likely to leave your baby to bottle feed itself if in fact it's a glass bottle, because if the baby lets the bottle slip and the bottle bonks it on the noggin, as it sometimes does, then in fact the baby will cry and it won't be very pleasant for anybody. So basically self-feeding is encouraged by very lightweight materials, because we think that even if they slip or drop, they're not going to come to any harm. Bottles that are meant for bottle feeding are pretty sturdy. Most of them will survive being dropped on anything except a tiled or a brick floor. They'll certainly survive being dropped on carpet. So as the older child uses them, I think the gain from the cleanliness of the bottle is greater than the potential risk of breaking a bottle. And glass bottles can still be found. As for teats, whether you use silicone or latex, well, that's hard to know, because again, while we have only a couple of comparative studies, the latex ones were more likely to contain thrush organisms there, fungi, but at the same time, the silicone ones were more likely to result in thrush infection in the baby's mouth, which seems paradoxical, but it might be that the silicone ones abrade the surface more, allow the colonization more. I don't know. All I know is one study found that, and it's one of the few studies that have compared silicone and latex in relation to anything. Latex, of course, we do now have an epidemic of latex allergy, which no one has linked back to using latex teats right up until the 1980s when silicone came along. It may be that it is more of a problem than we recognise, and there is cross-reactivity between latex allergy and some tree nuts, because after all, latex comes from a rubber tree way back somewhere along the way. So whether silicone's better or not, again, we don't know, because whatever turned silicone teats into, from being an inert mineral to being flexible, undoubtedly includes chemicals that soften it, and we don't know what those are. Nobody has really done that research. They're deemed to be safe, and so you choose whatever happens to be your choice and that you think your child will cope with. Unfortunately, again, there's very little to guide you about what would be preferable. Don't get any strongly shaped teats, because your baby is going to have to adjust the way it uses its mouth to the shape of those teats. And the only thing that I was able to find in the literature about the so-called orthodontic ones was that, in fact, if they were used past the age of 2, and many children are still using teats, although you would hope they'd be off bottles by the age of 12 months, and drinking from cups and things. But if you do use them through toddlerhood, in actual fact, they are associated with more orthodontic problems later in life. The orthodontic teats are aptly named, but not for the reasons you think. That was one study that was done that indicated that. So the preference I would have would be for whatever works for your baby, and to move them on to off teats and onto